In the cramped, dark, and damp space of the basement, a little girl around 5 or 6 years old, who was being tormented in that dark secret room, along with the dog that kept barking and threatening her without stopping. It made the girl so scared that facing this emotionless, frightening person, with one hand gripping a sword tightly, standing tall before her, the girl looked up, her tearful eyes, her lips trembling, trying to utter the words, "Why?" In front of Mia was a fat, bald man, with only white hair on the sides of his head, a big, round, reddened nose, and a white mustache. He replied to her, "I'm just doing what I should for this family. You filthy brat." Then, he gripped the sword with both hands and raised it in front of Mia, glaring at her and shouting, "Obediently accept your death." This statement made her terrified. She panicked, her mouth trembling. "Stop it, I'm scared, so scared. I don't want to die." No matter how frightened the little girl was, the world remained cruel to her. She was still trapped in that damp, foul-smelling, dark secret room, with the deafening sound of barking dogs echoing continuously. And suddenly, the fat old man raised his sword high, his eyes never leaving the small, pitiful figure. He began to snarl at Mia, "You are nothing but the seed of something filthy and disgusting." After those words came the horrifying sounds of crisp, swift slashes. But everything that just happened was only a nightmare for the little girl, and it made her immediately jump up after a few slashes had been made. She sprang up, breathing heavily, her pupils constantly darting around. There were even a few drops of sweat on her face about to drip down her chin. And this wasn't the first time she'd had this nightmare, but she still didn't know the reason behind why she frequently experienced this terrifying event. Feeling that she wasn't fully awake, the little girl shook her head vigorously, trying to shake off the lingering sleepiness. Now wasn't the time to sleep like that. Then, she pretended to cough a few times. She suddenly pointed at something and shouted, "You'll be poisoned." However, there was no sound in response to her sudden outburst. Everything remained uncomfortably silent, and the thing she was pointing at was just a small log with a few mushrooms growing around it, making the scene even more awkward. After that, the little girl crouched down, holding her round, soft cheeks in her hands. Her eyes drooped, showing sadness as she sighed, "Sigh, I was right, but I hate being a child. I'm only 5 years old, so my tongue is still short, and..." Then suddenly, she stood up abruptly, her eyes full of determination, as she looked down at the log. Her tiny hands clenched into small fists, and she thought to herself, "No, I won't give up." Then, she took a deep breath, and mustered up all her strength to scream straight at the wooden log. The culprit was Count Evelyn. Suddenly, the little girl changed her expression, showing delight, as she looked into the void and said, "The gold coin is so beautiful," then pouted, holding out both hands toward the log as if begging. "Someone, please give me that gold coin. Please give me money for care and upbringing," the little girl continued, hoping to have those caring gold coins placed directly in her hands. After that, she picked up the wooden log again, shaking it as if she were shaking a porcelain piggy bank with shining gold coins inside. They clinked against the porcelain and made a delightful jingling sound. At her age, almost every child is given a beautiful porcelain piggy bank by their parents to save coins. But then there are many poor children, without parents, without a home, who can never have a piggy bank like their peers, and this girl is one of them. Her name is Mia Evelyn, and she finds herself quite fond of money. But she does everything just to save her own small life. And while she was shaking that useless wooden log, suddenly, from Mia's stomach came the sound of growling. She was very hungry now. Realizing what she was doing was utterly pointless, Mia sat down on the floor, placing her hands on her knees, her head bowed down, her eyes filled with sadness. And she sighed again. "Sigh, I'll probably starve to death before I get any gold coins," she thought to herself, wondering whether the door would open today. Speaking of the door, Mia slowly, with little interest, glanced toward it. She had never been outside that door, so the little girl thought no one would ever come to save her. Currently, Mia is living in the Evelyn mansion, but they treat her no different than a ghost. And she could only endure all this injustice. Now, Mia's stomach kept growling, and she could only press her hand against her belly to stop those embarrassing sounds. After that, Mia turned back towards the door, thinking for a while. She needed to practice her pronunciation because her important day was coming soon. Even though MIA was currently in a situation where she had no food or drink, her clothes were tattered, and she had no toys except for that piece of wood. In reality, MIA was the daughter of the Saint Ursula Evelyn. She was the 99th child of God, and Saint Elhula was worshipped by most of the kingdom's people as a deity. She lived in heaven, a place unreachable by humans. Neraphim, a divine angel, used sacred powers. Those especially blessed by her were called saints, and their descendants, knights, would have brilliant silver hair. Thanks to my mother, the Evelyn family was very wealthy and powerful. She never told the child who she was. But that secret was revealed when I was born. When the girl was born, her hair didn't have the radiant silver color like her mother's, but it was black. And everyone in her kingdom believed that people with hair like hers possessed strange and cruel powers, and they also thought black hair was a symbol of the devil, the enemy of the Neraphim. And right after MIA was born, she was locked in a small room, and she was told that her mother had suddenly died of illness. Half of the kingdom's population were religious believers, so the Evelyn family did not accept me. MIA's aunt even believed that the way she was born was also how she killed her aunt's sister, and she always considered MIA to be a filthy demon brat. Believing that a child like her should never have been born, and because of her, her uncle was not nominated to be a cardinal. Because of this, the Evelyn family was always trying to take MIA's life, which is why she is now locked in the dark, damp cellar of the Evelyn mansion. Though abandoned like that, they still ordered a servant to change her diaper once a day, and the steward to teach her how to read once a week. Back to the present, MIA ran toward the window, which was 3 times larger than her tiny body, and tried to stand on tiptoe to look outside, but MIA was only a 5-year-old girl. So she wasn't tall enough to see out the window. At that moment, she thought to herself, she had to get out of here soon, or she would surely die, but where could she go? She was still so young, and didn't have a single penny on her. Thinking about money, MIA recalled the times when her uncle would point straight at her face and shout angrily, "We've spent so much money raising and educating you, MIA." Besides her uncle, she was often grabbed by the hair and angrily scolded by her aunt, "Go die." Their actions made her feel like she needed a lot of money, but at the same time, MIA still didn't understand why they let her live while always wishing for her death. Then, she remembered her birthday, on an evening when the sky was painted red and orange like a massive fire outside the window. Inside the huge Evelyn mansion, her heart-wrenching sobs echoed as she kept apologizing, "I'm sorry, I was wrong," and begged for mercy, but the person tormenting her didn't stop. MIA's aunt kept angrily pulling her hair, slapping, and hitting her tiny body while endlessly cursing, "Because of you, my sister's life was ruined. Why is there a devil in this house? You killed my sister." And MIA could only cry and respond, "Auntie, I'm sorry," and that day when she was being tormented was the day her aunt came to see her again. After 3 months. Then, MIA's aunt forced her to say after her, "I killed my mother, she died because she gave birth to me." And when MIA kept crying non-stop, she went mad and demanded that she speak up. Terrified and unsure of what to do, MIA could only tremble and repeat the words while trying to hold back her tears. To form a sentence. When she managed to say most of the sentence, the woman then took out a stack of blank paper and a pen, smiled wickedly, and told her to write down what she had just said. Although MIA was abandoned in the basement, she was still taught to read and write, but the first thing the housekeeper taught her was that her name did not bear the family's surname. And now MIA was too accustomed to writing down hurtful and self-deprecating sentences on paper whenever her aunt visited her. While MIA was sobbing and kneeling down, trying to write the sentence, her aunt stood up and began to leave. Before fully departing, she turned back with a sinister smile and said, "You know you won't get to eat if you don't finish writing it 100 times, right?" After saying that, she turned and slammed the door shut, and now MIA continued to write the sentence over and over, "I killed my mother, I am the daughter of a demon," until she wrote it 100 times to be allowed to eat. While writing, her mouth still emitted a few sniffles and sobs from the earlier crying fit, and MIA thought to herself that she was a demon that shouldn't have been born. That she had to die, she had to die. But then MIA brushed those thoughts aside and told herself that she truly wanted to live. But exhausted from crying too much and enduring unfair treatment, MIA truly felt discouraged, so she lay down among the papers she had just written on, her small body curled up tightly. And her eyes slowly closed. The tears that had lingered at the corners of her eyes now rolled down onto the cold ground. She softly whispered, "Mom," and gradually drifted off to sleep from exhaustion, falling into a deep dream afterward. And at another moment, MIA was pushed somewhere by that woman. That woman still used her harsh, yelling voice, demanding MIA to hurry up. This time, MIA looked quite different. She was dressed in a pretty yellow dress and matching ballet flats, instead of the old, tattered brown dress, and bare feet from before. Her short legs tried to keep pace, as she walked through a very busy place. Then MIA stopped, looking around at her surroundings. The place where she stood was luxurious, and all around her were wealthy, noble, and powerful people. MIA tightly held a glass of red wine in her hand, looking around in fearful confusion. As if in a dream she would never forget. And it seemed like 4 dreams had already begun to happen. On MIA's birthday, she was brought into a small room. Suddenly, she had a bedroom and clothes, and because she didn't want to be locked up anymore, she followed all their instructions. And her first dream was terrible. After being given a bedroom and nice clothes to wear, she wore a colored wig to cover her black hair, and successfully sneaked into the victory celebration at the royal capital. Then, her aunt slightly bent down, smiled, and said, "Do you see that boy? Go over there and offer him a drink. This drink is good for the body, so you must give it to him, understand?" And the boy she pointed to was a red-haired young man with matching eyes. He had a beautiful profile, with a sharp jawline that looked like it could cut through paper, a high, straight nose, and a gently smiling mouth. One of his ears had 2 piercings. Overall, he was very attractive, drawing the attention of all the girls. His name was Abel Dernadeva. Speaking of the Dernadeva family, the Duke Dernadeva family was the greatest force opposing El Hulla, and they were also key figures in the Demon Council, leaders of the demons. And now, MIA should have thought at least once about why they told her to bring water to the second son of that family. When she heard her aunt's request, she thought that if she didn't comply, they would go mad again. So MIA tried to approach him and handed the glass of water to Abel. When he saw the girl hesitantly offering the drink, Abel turned to her and smiled, then thanked her. And MIA stood there, witnessing Abel drink the red liquid with her own eyes. And suddenly, Abel coughed violently, even coughing up blood. The pain in his throat was so severe that tears streamed down his face. Not long after, Abel collapsed and died, his eyes wide open, blood trickling from his mouth. The horrifying sight made her panic and step back, and it haunted her for days. A few months later, MIA realized what she had done that day. She had killed someone. While still in shock, her aunt stood behind her, grinning smugly, and told her that she was a murderer. A few months after that event, a war broke out in retaliation for Abel's death. The Dernadeva family led the war, and all the demon clans joined the battle. They declared war on those who believed in El Hulla. The Evelyn family, along with the holy knights and the priests in the royal palace, also fought against the demons. Even though she didn't understand why, MIA eventually realized that her aunt had used her to start the war. That afternoon, after waking up, MIA stood facing the window, looking outside. She thought about the war she had caused. It's terrible. I hate calling him uncle. Then she turned away from the window, slumped to the floor, frowning. That man was Count Evelyn, MIA thought. And from then on, MIA was imprisoned in the Evelyn family's mansion for a long, very long time. After what felt like an entire century, MIA finally stepped out of that mansion. She hesitated, slowly walking out, mumbling, all of it, all of it. It's all my fault. The once innocent, petite girl had now grown up. Her body had become thin and frail. Her black hair, curled from the middle down, now extended past her slender back. MIA slowly walked down the war-ravaged road. The large, round eyes of her 5-year-old self had now been replaced by a pair of lifeless, unmoving eyes, gazing forward without emotion. Of course, if the dream ended here, she wouldn't be able to make any plans. At present, MIA was slowly approaching the man in front of her. He was standing on a large rock, his back turned to her, facing the desolate scene of nearly ruined mansions. His cloak fluttered in the wind. If the dream continued. In the midst of the chaotic void, the sky donned the orange-yellow hues of dusk. The man continued to stand there, witnessing the desolation and ruin. After a while, the handsome man turned to look at Mia. And then he told her, "So, you are indeed my daughter." Facing the man, who claimed to be her biological father, Mia couldn't believe it. Her face revealed a myriad of emotions she couldn't even describe. Was her real father the Duke of Dernadeva? And the man her mother fell in love with was the Duke of a rival family. Even though Earl Evelyn always hid the truth from her, and didn't want her to meet her father. And even though she knew nothing, a few days after that birthday, Mia herself killed her half-brother. Thus, the first dream ended here. In the second dream, Mia didn't follow any orders. After that, she was killed by the Duke, and he would discard her body. He would leave her body at the doorstep of the Dernadeva residence. And this ruthless act would lead to war once again. Then, Mia had a third dream, and this one was the most normal of all the dreams she had. In this dream, every time they saw Mia, the servants became excited. They hated her just like her grandparents, the Evelyns. On holidays, they would drag her into the laundry room to bathe her. But she sneaked out and escaped from that haunted mansion. And so, she began her life wandering on the streets. Mia couldn't go to the orphanage because she knew her family would do everything to find her. With her life on the streets, she joined a street gang at a very young age. After a difficult time wandering the streets, she met a kind master and became an apprentice. Looking at her appearance, no one could guess that Mia was the daughter of a noble family. In the years that followed, Mia worked hard and eventually became a cashier manager, but all those beautiful things only happened in Mia's dream. Right now, her small body is curled up, rolling on the cold ground. She still keeps her eyes tightly shut, not wanting to wake up from that dream. She's too tired, really doesn't want to wake up at all. And finally, she dreamt of the fourth dream. This dream was very special and quite short. In this dream, Mia's appearance changed a lot. Her hair became smoother with a purple hue, like a galaxy. A few cute clips were pinned in her hair, and she was dressed in a beautiful pink dress. Elegant and completely different from the old, tattered brown dress. As the dream began, someone was gently stroking her head and affectionately calling her name. Mel. Is her real name Mel? The little girl wondered. Mel, the man continued to call her name while gently stroking her flowing purple hair, his tender eyes looking down at her. Duke Dernadeva continued to stroke her head. These gentle gestures gave Mia a sense of safety and comfort, a feeling she had never experienced before, so she always longed for it. Now that she was immersed in the feeling she had always desired, she gradually leaned into the Duke's embrace, blinking a few times before slowly closing her eyes. A smile forming on her lips. Even though she didn't know what was happening, everything felt so sweet. But it was just a dream. When she remembered her current fate, Mia forced herself to wake up from the dream, panting, her eyes dazed as she looked around. A few drops of sweat had formed on her forehead. But why? Then she scrambled to sit up, leaning against the wall, wondering why the Duke had held her. She thought that because of her, her father had to die. After pondering for a while, Mia hugged herself again, sighed, looked down at the ground, and muttered, "It was just a trap, nothing good ever happens to me." But what if the things you see in the future are real? If you could choose your future, you could escape from this mansion. And the plan you've come up with is quite simple. First, you'll report your uncle's plot to your father. Since your father is an enemy of the Evelyn family, you think the Duke will definitely listen to you. Next, Mia will use that information to exchange for alimony. The reason you want to do this is because, in your last dream, your father wasn't scary at all. It feels a bit strange to ask for money instead of asking to be taken care of. Third, ask your father to find a safe place for a child like you, or maybe a place that needs a worker. And finally, after you've received the money, you'll find somewhere else to live. Finishing your fantasy of changing your future, Mia stood up, clenched both hands, and showed determination. I've practiced my pronunciation very diligently. So everything will be fine, Mia naively thought. Then Mia knelt down, clasped her hands, and prayed for herself. If there's a God, please let my father be a gentleman. And while MIA was praying, she suddenly heard some rattling noises coming from that wooden door. 2 people entered her room, but she didn't like the look of these 2 at all. However, in the end, the door had opened, and standing before her were 2 demon uncles. This time, they walked in with grim faces, but didn't do anything to MIA. They were dressed in beautiful and luxurious clothes. The fat uncle wore a white robe with intricate patterns, and a bright gemstone embedded in the layers of his turban. As for the woman, she was dressed in a red gown with sparkling red gemstone jewelry. Facing them, MIA tried to pretend to be obedient and polite. She bowed, clasped her hands together, and cheerfully said, "Uncle, Aunt." Then she looked up with bright, sparkling eyes and said, "I missed you both so much." After that, the uncle didn't let her say anything more and seriously told her to follow him. At first, she was quite scared, worrying that she would be taken somewhere to be beaten or tortured. But his next request completely surprised her, "Change your clothes." "Really?" she asked joyfully, her face lighting up, her eyes shining as if they held 1,000 stars. The 2 of them just looked at her with disgust, then turned away without saying another word. Before stepping out of MIA's room, the woman turned back, looked at her with displeasure, then turned away and started to leave with her husband. They just walked away without a second thought, while for MIA, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Once she escaped from this room, she believed that her journey through her previous dreams would begin. This moment, right now, would be MIA's chance to act. And now, MIA had been moved to an old bedroom that was almost fully furnished. She climbed onto the bed, her legs too short to reach the floor, so they dangled above the ground from the bed that was taller than her by just an inch. "Wow, so soft," MIA remarked. Although the room was a bit old, it wasn't too cold, and her feet no longer got scratched by wooden splinters. Then she happily waited on that bed, and recalled her dreams. In the first dream, she had sat next to the woman during dinner, but now it was already dinner time. And she was still alone in the room. The reason she hadn't come out for dinner yet was because the maids were surrounding her on the small bed, and she was panicking, screaming, "I don't like it, don't touch me." MIA kept struggling, and when one of the maids tried to reach out towards her face, MIA didn't hesitate and bit her hand. This action was done in front of the man and woman, but they didn't react aggressively to her behavior. The maid who had been bitten quickly pulled her hand back and glared at MIA angrily. But MIA wasn't weak. She glared back at the maid with the fierce eyes of an animal being attacked. Witnessing MIA's behavior, the woman disdainfully told her maids to leave her alone and then walked away, arm in arm with her husband. MIA's uncle looked at it with disgust and told his servant to give the monster more time to adapt. Then he turned and walked out of the room with his wife. At the request and calm demeanor of the 2 masters, the maids were quite shocked. One had her eyes slightly widened and her mouth agape, speechless. Shortly after, the 3 maids also left the room. Seeing them close the door, MIA felt relieved. Phew, everything happened like the 3rd dream, she thought. In that dream, the servant would bring her food, so should she act carelessly, the servant would get angry, scold, and torment her to vent their anger, and then she would have the opportunity to escape. Once she successfully escaped, MIA would immediately go find her father, Duke Dernadeva. Although she had planned a reasonable escape route, she was still worried. Even though her father was the Demon King Duke, she thought that he wouldn't abandon his biological daughter. And speaking of alimony, she had to get it, alimony, yes, alimony. Suddenly, while she was talking to herself, her room door opened, revealing a maid holding her tray of food. Upon closer look, the maid was the one MIA had bitten earlier. At that time, she was annoyed and furious, as if she wanted to kill MIA right then and there. Yet now, the maid cheerfully brought the tray of food to MIA, as if nothing had happened before. MIA kept staring at her and thought to herself, I knew it. In her dream, this maid would often bully her and use the excuse of taking care of her to force MIA to eat things not meant for humans. While MIA was deep in thought, the maid placed the food tray on a nearby table, and it emitted a very unpleasant odor. The hot soup, though it looked quite appetizing, had the strongest stench. It was likely made from a variety of disgusting things no human could swallow. Next to the red soup was a bowl containing an uncooked potato and something that seemed to have been burnt to a crisp. MIA kept staring at the food tray with a look of disgust. If she ate this, she would surely die. Moreover, the maid didn't give her a spoon or fork, clearly intending something malicious. Seeing MIA just staring at the food without moving, the maid gave a contemptuous smile and said, "What's wrong, you wild beast? You've never been to school, have you? Eat with your hands." In this situation, MIA had only two choices, eat or be forced to eat. And in the third dream, MIA would definitely choose not to eat. She immediately retorted to the maid, pointing at the food tray angrily and demanding, "Feed me." This request left the maid utterly shocked. Her face twisted in confusion as she replied, "What? You should eat by yourself, miss." But MIA paid her no mind. She turned away and grumbled, "If you don't feed me, I'll tell the count." So that hateful maid had to tell her to wait a moment while she went to get the utensils. But MIA wasn't going to let her bully get away so easily, so she slammed the bed and loudly said, "No, you have to feed me," and this act of outrage surprised her. She turned back to look at her, confused, and asked, "You mean my hands?" "Yes, why should I feed myself?" Hearing MIA's sharp question, she felt a bit embarrassed and awkwardly replied, I forgot." Seeing her start to feel uncomfortable like that, MIA secretly rejoiced and then gave her a difficult question, "You don't do this often, do you?" And MIA's question made the maid even more furious, silently cursing her mistress, "You'll be cursed." No matter how angry she was, MIA seriously pointed to the door and ordered her, "Take it away and do it again for me." And no matter how angry she was, she still had to keep her manners. Had to address her properly, "What? This will take a lot of time," and not letting her continue, MIA turned away and casually said, "Otherwise I'll tell all your intentions." The reason MIA said this to the maid was because Count Evelyn was coming here for an inspection. So she had to take advantage of this opportunity. Faced with MIA's fearless attitude, the maid was furious, but she couldn't do anything. She just stood there cursing her, this brat, who gave birth to her, and immediately MIA thought she wasn't going to redo the food. Just a few seconds later, MIA screamed "Count!" And the panicked maid tried to cover her mouth. Of course, she didn't want to be caught, but since she was bullying MIA on purpose, MIA had no choice but to do that. And a few seconds after that, MIA grabbed the hand that was covering her mouth, pointed at the food tray with her other hand, and said, "If you don't want this, then tear the food apart." Already irritated, the maid became even more furious while taking care of her. Seeing the maid's expression, MIA thought, "Right, you don't like taking orders from a child. I understand that. So, I'll forgive you if you do as I say." But instead of following MIA's request, the maid just stood there frozen, her face twisted in anger, staring at her like a raging gorilla. Seeing that, MIA looked up and shouted at her, "Do you want to be fired?" That question was the last straw, and the maid started to lose her temper. She yelled straight at MIA's face, "You little bitch. Don't think that just because I call you miss you can do whatever you want. Do you think you'll be treated like a lady for the rest of your life?" Hearing that, MIA just looked at her with boredom and replied, "Of course not." While the two were on the verge of a mental showdown, another maid rushed to the open door and announced that the Count was coming. This announcement made the maid release her grip from MIA's shoulder and turn towards the other maid, asking, "What? Why so sudden?" Meanwhile, MIA had her own plan in mind, taking a deep breath. Then she screamed loudly, her voice echoing throughout the massive mansion, causing the birds outside to fly away. At that moment, the Count arrived at the door and asked the maid what was going on. Suddenly, a loud bang followed by the clattering of a metal tray hitting the ground was heard, and 2 bowls of food, not meant for human consumption, spilled onto the floor, creating a cacophony of shattering sounds. As the maid standing next to MIA panicked and the Count approached, MIA used all her strength to slap herself, producing a sharp, clear sound. Shortly after, MIA's uncle sternly entered the room. Seeing him, the blonde maid stammered, "Oh, Count." As he stepped into the room, he saw MIA sitting on the bed with tears in her eyes, one cheek flushed from the slap, while the maid stood trembling, hands clasped, head bowed. Witnessing this scene, he demanded, "What are you doing? Answer me now," which only made the maid more confused and frightened. But before she could find a way to explain the situation and open her mouth to clarify, Mia started sniffing, pointed at her, and reported, "Uncle, she made me eat with my hands. She said if I didn't listen to her, I would go bald like you." As soon as she finished, Mia pointed at his completely bald head. This lie from the little girl shocked and confused the two maids, and what gave her the courage to say it was the dream she had, knowing that the Count hated being mocked. Whenever he hears the word bald, Count Evelyn can't stay calm. He is often ridiculed like a pot because there's not a single hair on his head, and Mia successfully hit the spot that drove him mad. The uncle couldn't believe his ears. Someone dared to associate the word bald with him, and that person was someone from the Evelyn family. He was so furious he couldn't utter a word, his eyes widened, and his mouth trembled slightly. "What?" he asked again, "What did you just say?" His face stiff and angry, the muscles in his face twitched, making him look quite terrifying. Mia tearfully replied, "She said you are bald. She also said you are very lazy and eat a lot." Hearing this, he didn't know what to say next, only standing there, his whole body trembling with rage. It was as if smoke could come out of his bald head from his intense anger. The other maid turned and began to feel more scared than before, her voice trembling, "Boo-hoo, master." Not allowing her to say anything more, the man angrily shouted, How dare you say that?" "I didn't," she protested, but he interrupted her again, still furious, "Take her outside, I will punish you." Upon hearing that she was about to be punished, the maid panicked, pointed towards Mia, and defended herself, "No, it wasn't me, she's lying." Meanwhile, Mia was thinking, "Goodbye, nameless maid, you have to be fired so the other maids will hate me." And after that maid was fired, Mia would be taken to the laundry room by the remaining maids, just as in her third dream. Thinking about being taken there made Mia sad. She lowered her head and stared at the floor gloomily. Meanwhile, the maid screamed as she was dragged out by the others to be punished by the Count. After the maid was dragged out, Mia looked up and stared directly into the man's eyes, trying to gauge his reaction. It seemed like the Count didn't suspect anything, but as she looked at him, she noticed a hint of lingering anger on his face from the earlier commotion. He continued to stare at her sternly without saying a word. Observing his expression closely, Mia grew worried about her fate, wondering if he might kill her. The thought made Mia shiver, her skin broke out in goosebumps. She avoided his gaze and thought, "According to my prophetic dream, today isn't the day I die, so there's nothing to fear." Then suddenly, Mia's uncle turned his back and left. Before he completely walked out, he announced that she wouldn't be allowed to eat anything today. When her uncle had fully left her bedroom, Mia's stomach began to growl. Even though she knew she wouldn't be allowed to eat for the rest of the day, Mia had successfully taken the first step in her escape plan, and she celebrated her first victory quietly in her mind. She thought her uncle had only forbidden her from eating yesterday, but even the next morning, she wasn't given any breakfast. Around noon, while she was asleep, she suddenly heard some clattering sounds near her room. Curious about the noise, Mia opened her eyes, woke up, and when her vision steadied, she saw the maid from the day before entering the room, slamming a tray of food down on a nearby table, and saying, "Here's your food." Mia waited until the maid left, and then eagerly ran to the tray. Finally, after dozens of hours, she could eat something. On the tray were a few rolls and a bowl of hot soup that looked quite appealing. Unlike the food from the day before, it didn't have any unpleasant smell. After confirming that the food was safe for humans to eat, Mia sat down and devoured it. While enjoying her meal, Mia wondered if she could eat something better if she had money for her upbringing. She asked herself this question. Speaking of her upbringing, Mia remembered Duke-colored Pasha Durnadeva. Her father was known as a demon on the battlefield. She had heard that he was the demon among demons. When it comes to Durnadeva's children, his two sons have completely opposite personalities, like fire and water. No one knows where or when his sons were born. People only know that they are very strong and cold. The second son is the one who drank the poisoned wine from MIA, and she thought he seemed less cold than she had imagined. Suddenly, she shook her head vigorously, trying to tell herself to stay alert. No, this is just a dream. Focus on what you need, MIA reminded herself. But after a long while, MIA wondered if her father would believe her. Count Evelyn was praised as a kind man. Then, MIA imagined herself standing in front of her father, hands outstretched, firmly asking, "Do you want to buy information that could prevent the world from collapsing? It's cheap, extremely cheap, top secret information worth only 1,000 gold coins." She was still imagining saying this to Count Derndra. No matter how difficult the path she had mapped out, MIA was determined to accomplish it at all costs. And 2 days later, while MIA was taking a quick nap on her soft bed, she heard a clattering sound outside, and someone entered the room angrily, annoyed, saying, "It's so smelly, go take a bath. And don't forget to bring your wig," the person continued. This statement fully awakened MIA. From a dazed state, she immediately opened her eyes wide and was instantly alert. Finally, the day had come. The moment she had been waiting for all this time had finally arrived. Standing at the doorway, a maid with her hair in a high bun announced that Count Evelyn had left. This was also the moment when they revealed their true nature. The maid, who had been bitten on the hand by MIA, demanded she wake up and go outside. When they saw MIA didn't move from the bed, the two of them slowly approached where she was lying, with a mischievous smile. They spoke in a menacing tone, "You brat. Do you think you're the mistress?" As soon as they finished speaking, they grabbed MIA's hands and legs, dragging her towards the back of the mansion. They even called for the other maid to help out. "This is your place, come on, take a bath." With the combined efforts of the three of them, MIA was dragged out to the backyard. She could only struggle and scream, "Let me go." After realizing that asking them to let her go was useless, she cried out for help, "Uncle, help me." But no matter how loud she screamed or how much she struggled, no miracle came to save her. The blonde maid even said, "The master is gone, and the mistress isn't here, so it's pointless to scream." That statement felt like rubbing salt in the wound caused by her efforts. When they reached the bathing area, they dropped her, causing her to land on the ground with a painful thud. Seeing MIA suffering in pain on the ground, they gathered around her, encircling her with eager and excited eyes. Despite the difficulty, MIA believed she could endure it. It would be okay. The maids didn't know that the aunt was coming. When cold water was poured on her, she just had to cry as loud as possible. And so, MIA sat still, allowing them to pour an entire bucket of cold water over her head. But to successfully carry out her plan, she first had to go along with their demands. Seeing MIA sitting still, letting them pour water over her, the maids became more amused, laughing even louder. "Oh, the little mistress has to take a bath." The maid with the bun began mocking her. "Make sure to wash well, but no matter how much you scrub, your filthy black hair will never be clean, ha ha." Then it was the blonde maid's turn to mock MIA. And MIA knew that they absolutely hated her because they believed in El Hala. They hated her because she was the daughter of the devil, and MIA knew this well, so she wasn't sad at all. In the hidden space filled with the laughter of the three maids, MIA sat on the ground, shivering because the water was too cold. While MIA was at her weakest and least stubborn, they pointed at her and said, "Look at this girl, does she look like she has royal blood? How ridiculous." Those insulting words fueled her anger, and she looked up at them with a look of resentment. While observing them, MIA suddenly noticed a rather large hole in the estate's fence, and it seemed just the right size for a 5-year-old girl. There's the escape route. But what about her clothes? Her dress was already soaked because of them. She glanced at the maids and saw the one with loose hair holding a new yellow dress. A few seconds later, there were some clacking sounds from high heels, getting closer and closer to where MIA and the three maids were. MIA's aunt had returned, and upon witnessing the three maids surrounding MIA with an empty bucket, she raised her voice, saying, "I told you to help bathe her. What the hell are you all doing?" She gradually approached them. When the three maids noticed her presence, they were stunned, shocked. "Ah, mistress," one maid spoke up. But after the she didn't know what else to say. And the aunt's arrival at this very moment was MIA's only chance. Thinking quickly, the girl bit down hard on the maid's hand that was holding her. In pain, the maid let go, and MIA quickly ran toward the yellow dress, yanked it decisively from the maid's grasp, and started to run away from them. While running, MIA brushed past the aunt. This action caused the aunt to freeze for a moment, her face now no longer frowning as before, but showing a slight expression of surprise. Seeing that the aunt didn't stop her, but just stood there in a daze, MIA glanced at her in confusion. Taking advantage of the aunt's inaction, MIA seized the opportunity and ran toward the crack in the stone wall. She tried to squeeze through the gap while the maids quickly chased after her. And the blonde-haired maid quickly grabbed her ankle. MIA, halfway out of the wall, suddenly felt someone holding her ankle. So she immediately started struggling, kicking her legs relentlessly, and her fierce struggle made it difficult for the maid to keep hold of her any longer. With just a few more kicks, MIA managed to free her leg from the maid's grip and quickly ran out of the mansion's grounds. MIA ran while desperately trying to pull on that yellow dress. After successfully putting it on, she immediately saw the alley behind the Evelyn mansion. It was the road MIA had lived on and wandered in her third dream. Finally, as she found and ran along the road to escape the control and unfair treatment from the Evelyn family mansion, MIA was excited and hopeful, believing that whether it was the maids, guards, or knights, none of them could possibly find her. Throughout the alley, MIA kept running and running, her breathing growing heavier, clearly showing her exhaustion. Behind MIA, two common-looking men noticed her small figure running by, and they began to have ill intentions when they saw the dress she was wearing. "That dress looks expensive. She must be from a well-off family," they whispered to each other. MIA accidentally overheard them and realized this situation was really bad. Suddenly, they started chasing her. The man who was quickly closing the distance between him and her shouted to the other, "What are you doing? Hurry up and catch her." Facing this situation, MIA had to give it her all, running as fast as she could toward the main road. The man continued to chase after MIA, yelling, "Stop!" On the main road, many people were gathered, watching something, and this was a good opportunity for her to lose him. So, despite being nearly out of strength, MIA tried her best to run quickly towards the crowd, hoping to escape the hands of the bad man, who was getting closer. Not long after, MIA successfully blended into the crowd and managed to lose the man with bad intentions. As she slowly weaved through the large legs of the adults, she suddenly saw something. MIA tried to push her way to the front, and saw a grand carriage moving along the city's main road. Suddenly, from both sides of the street, there were blaring horns and sirens echoing through the entire area. Right after that, the people standing around started cheering excitedly, exclaiming, "Wow! Hail the Grand Duke! Long live!" Then, as the crowd continued to surge forward, pushing and shoving, MIA was knocked down in the middle of the road. At that moment, the horse pulling the royal carriage suddenly reared up on its hind legs and let out a loud, long neigh. The sound and sight startled MIA, leaving her terrified and unsure of what to do next. She looked up and saw the horse about to stomp on the spot where she was sitting. Her eyes began to well up with tears. "Please, I don't want to die like this," MIA sobbed. With her muscles frozen in fear, MIA closed her eyes, bracing herself for the horse's hooves to crush her. "Please, just give me one chance," she prayed, hoping for a miracle to save her. Even as death seemed imminent. And indeed, that miracle came to save MIA's small life. The man on the carriage, coldly, commanded, "Stop." And immediately, the entire carriage stopped moving, not even a twitch. It completely came to a halt, even though the carriage had been moving at quite a speed just moments before. Just a few meters away from her was the horse's head. Suddenly, MIA heard a voice coming from behind her, a deep, tender, gentle voice, like someone drenched in water, and the girl turned around. Facing her was the Duke of Dernadeva, known as the King of Demons. He coldly looked down at MIA, scrutinizing, observing if she was injured. As they faced each other like this, MIA carefully observed and couldn't believe her eyes. It was her father. The one she had been searching for all this time. Overcome with emotion, MIA cried out the word father with all the love and longing she had harbored for years. Her cry of father tore through the silence and ripped at everyone's hearts, It was so heartbreaking. That father was the word she had suppressed for so many years. A cry that burst forth from the depths of her soul. Facing her own flesh and blood, Mia's eyes welled up with tears. She thought to herself, I must speak clearly to father. No, don't cry, she told herself. Then she tried to speak. But her voice trembled with overwhelming emotions. I. Not letting her say anything more, the Duke asked curiously, how strange, why do you have my scent? Because I am your daughter. No, father must recognize me immediately. These were the countless words Mia wanted to say. Her emotions overwhelmed her, making it difficult to form a coherent sentence. Too choked with emotion, Mia could only burst into tears,